This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Boy, I'll tell you what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how much people suck at driving. Seriously, between road construction and people driving 25 miles an hour in a 40 speed zone. And I'm not even what you would call a hazardous driver, but I certainly don't have patience for people's BS on the road. It's called an accelerator for a reason, people. Use it. And if you're going to drive 30 miles under the speed limit just to be a douchebag, at least lend me the common courtesy of flipping you off in the passing lane. Yeah, I'm fired up today. Where's my Lex Luger clip? I'm pissed now. Could also be because I watched Dynamite this past week, and that one kind of left a sour taste in my mouth after the fact. At least I didn't turn the show off in disgust like I did last week, but me sticking around for the whole 2 hours didn't make the show any better. We'll get into that whole fiasco of a television program in a minute, but before we do so, if you are new to checking out the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, welcome to the show. We are on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new content. As always, if you like what you hear and you'd like to check back each week for our weekly retro review series shows, pay-per-view recaps, and TV reports, make sure to subscribe, comment, like the show, and all that good jazz. In case you did not check out the Monday show from this past week, first of all, check it out when you get a little bit of free time. It is a lengthy one, but we covered WWF SummerSlam 1993 as part of our WWF Retro Review Series, where we have been going back and reviewing the Monday Night Raw archives from 93 onward. We also covered NWA 74 pay-per-view event from last weekend, a show that filled me with a lot of perspective on where that product is right now in terms of buzz and intrigue. We have been reviewing the NWA Power shows as part of the Monday show, but with how down I've been on the current NWA product lately, I have decided in the last few weeks that we are going to be replacing the Power reports and trying to get back into the swing of things of giving WWE another try. I have not watched an episode of SmackDown in well over 2 years now, at least. I think I checked out their pilot episode when they switched over to Fox in whatever year that was at this point, like late 2019. It was like right before the beer bug hit and the whole world shut down. But seeing as how Vince is now out of the equation, people are a little more hot on the current booking and storylines, I wanted to throw my 2 cents and see what all the hype is about. I will not make any promises that I will eventually include the Monday Night Raw shows as well, but I don't know, dude. This AEW product is always finding new ways to keep me nudging myself out the door in some manner. I haven't given up on them quite yet, but I wouldn't rule it out. So, obviously for today's show, we've got the Dynamite report to run down, as well as the continuation of our retro review series for NWA World Championship Wrestling. And I'll get to the whole world class thing at the end. But seeing as how I'm already in quite the mood, let's get into it. We all slog our way through this report as best we can. This episode of All Ebb Wrestling. No flow, all ebb. by the way, how oxymoronic is it to call this company All Elite Wrestling at this point when they're probably the farthest they've been from All Elite since company inception? Good God, dude. I mean, we tried to warn them. Tried to be nice. Tried to be upfront and honest from the beginning when this company first started, but this is what happens when you let the inmates run the asylum. Chaos, pandemonium, everyone thinking they have all the answers when in actuality none of them know what the fuck they're doing. And the end result? Locker room division, backstage drama, and pretty much anything that is contradictory to the brand All Elite Wrestling. What do you even call them at this point? Should we call them All Divided Wrestling? All Isolation Wrestling? All Alienation Wrestling? I mean, I know it's easy to poke and make fun at this point, but I don't know. What else do you do at this point? You can offer advice. It's not like Tony or anyone else for that matter is going to take it. I mean, everyone's been saying it for 3 years now, and I ranted about it on last week's review. And whether it's me talking about it, whether it's Jim Cornette talking about it, Brian Last talking about it, Eric Bischoff talking about it, anybody right now that doesn't have a full-scale bias for this company and actually provides strong, constructive, valuable criticism, AEW, for whatever you want to say about talent acquisition, booking, week-to-week presentation, viewership stagnation, whatever item or topic you think is the biggest problem for that company to date, to this day, their biggest flaw as a company, number one, top of the list, lack of leadership. Since day one, it has been a constant case of too many hands in the cookie jar from an executive position. And while Tony may be calling the shots and finalizing things, the bottom line is that when you give free rein to the boys and you give them too much leeway and creative freedom to do pretty much whatever they want to with very little filter, there are consequences to that. And AEW is now seeing that unfold in front of their very eyes. And I'm sorry that people might not like hearing this, but let's just call a spade a spade. Tony Khan is not a good leader. He does not have good leadership instincts or qualities. He's way too soft. He's not an imposing enough force that when he steps into a room, there is a cohesive consensus from everyone to be on their best behavior. He refuses to put his foot down. He refuses to take ownership and teach his employees to act like grown-ass adults. And I don't care what the circumstance is, whether it's Eddie Kingston getting butthurt that Sammy Guevara called him fat, or it's Thunder Rosa and Britt Baker having issues behind the scenes, or Adam Page and CM Punk having personal issues behind the scenes. At some point, Tony needs to grow a set of balls and put these high school jagoffs in their place. You tell them, this is a business for grown adults. And if you're going to act like 14-year-old middle school girls on your period, then get the fuck out of my company and go back to picking scraps on the indie circuit where half of you belong anyway. I'll let you all out of your contract right now. And you'll be praying to God you make a quarter of what I'm paying you fuckwads. That's how you command attention. That is how you read a riot act of people that overstep their boundaries. And the people that are serious about this job and actually want to succeed in this business, actually have a passion to get better, those people will stick around and take your comments to heart. And the other 80% of them, they'll complain, they'll bitch, they'll moan, because they're a bunch of late millennial piss ants that were given blue ribbons and participation trophies their entire lives and were rewarded for mediocrity. That's the generation we live in now. So the show opened with the oil mechanic coming out for a promo. The AEW World Champion. And it was the usual Jon Moxley intro we've seen 100,000 times now. Takes about 6 months for him to actually get to the ring. Justin Roberts gives himself a hernia during the ring intro. Meanwhile, I am listening to the announcers droning on and on about what happened in last week's title match with Punk and Mox, thinking to myself, you know what would have been a great idea while Moxley was taking his good old time shucking and jiving to the ring? Instead of telling us about what happened last week, how about you show us a fucking replay of it? You know, just in case somebody missed. Oh, that's right, I forgot though. How silly of me. Yeah, the only people that watch this stupid show are the marks anyway, so wouldn't have mattered. And obviously, they're in Chicago this week, so I guess Jon Moxley is supposed to be a heel, even though he's usually booked as a babyface. And he was rambling on about God knows what. Most of it I can't take seriously because I'm watching him bebop and snort around the ring like a cocaine addict. He's basically calling Punk a pussy, and we all know how much TBS loves the term pussy being used on their TV show. Just ask Jungle Boy about that. And he eventually gets to the deal where he pulls out an open contract and essentially leaves it in the ring, saying it is fair game for anyone that wants to sign it and face Moxley for the belt at All Out. And of course, the fans start immediately chanting MJF because in an ideal world, where this company is run by somebody smart that knows what they're doing, well, of course, MJF would be the most logical conclusion when it comes to signing an open contract for a world title match. So, of course, they didn't go that direction. And this is where things get very screwy. Because Moxley leaves the contract in the ring and takes off. And as they cut to the announce team in the background, we see an unidentified man walk down to the ring, pull out the contract, and walk back up the ramp. We were told this man's name was Ace Steel. I can't confirm whether or not that is his Christian name, but if I had to venture a guess, I would presume he may be related to Jefferson Steelflex. Anybody that doesn't get that reference, look it up. There was more to come with this later on, so I won't go too into detail right now, but keep that name in your back pocket. After this was a Chris Jericho promo where he plugged his match with Bryan Danielson for the pay-per-view. And of course, while he's talking, Daniel Garcia conveniently walks into the frame with his hands folded. Looked like a fucking kindergartner walking up to a school principal to apologize for causing the food fight at lunch. And I don't know what he said. Something fake and scripted about pledging allegiance to the Jericho Appreciation Society or something. Then we went to Bryan Danielson versus Jake Hagar. Because if there's one guy on this show that screams out ratings, it is Jake Hagar. Guy's blander than a jar of fucking mayonnaise. Yet somehow this guy is still under an AEW contract after 3 years of contributing absolutely nothing to the product. By the way, just because I like jerking people around, I wanted to throw this out in the open. At this point in the program, we had seen on-screen appearances from Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho, Jake Hagar, and Bryan Danielson. All former WWE guys. Because AEW is all about that homegrown talent, right? And of course, we were approximately 15 minutes into the show at this point, so we were about overdue for a completely unnecessary table bump. No joke. Within the first 2 minutes of this match, they do a spot where Hagar cuts off Danielson doing a suicide attempt, and then he picks him up and he puts him through the timekeeper's table with a spine buster. Was this a finishing spot? Was it an injury angle? Was it a DQ for using a table in a non-hardcore sanctioned match? Nope. Just a spot for them to do. Just for shits and giggles. Not even a pitch to commercial. because Hagar ended up throwing Danielson back into the ring to do more stuff before they actually cut to the break. And when we come back, they proceeded to do several more minutes of passable but mostly boring wrestling until finally at the end, Danielson hit Hagar with the running knee for the pinfall. And of course, because every god-blessed match on the show must end with a run-in or heat angle of some sort, Matt Retard and Angelo Poppins run down to beat up Danielson until Hot Wheel Yuta and Cesaro run out for the save. And, well, they end up chasing everyone to the back, but while that is going on, Chris Jericho runs down to the ring with a chair so that he can tease hitting Danielson with it, only for Daniel Garcia to conveniently hit the ring and pull the chair away from Chris. And evidently that led to Danielson hitting Jericho with the Busaiku knee off the distraction. And then Daniel Garcia stood there looking frumpy. And by the way, where the hell was Jon Moxley during all this? Was he stampeding around the parking lot, snorting coke and contemplating his life while his buddies were getting beat up? Or is he just actively distancing himself from the Blackpool Combat Club stuff too? I wish they all would. And while we're on the subject, could they be wasting Claudio any more than they have since he first showed up? Seriously, the guy has done absolutely nothing on the show since he arrived except participate in a garbage War Games match, win a fake world championship from a company that exists in name only, and I'm pretty sure the rest of his appearances have consisted of run-ins when his boys are getting beat up in segments. What a waste. Up next, we had what I can merely best describe as a prototypical AEW moment. Completely random, completely unexplained. We have the wingmen standing in the ring with picket signs, and they're bitching and moaning about, I don't know, I guess not being booked on the TV show or something. Yeah, join the club with about 75% of the rest of this fucking overbloated roster. And by the way, who are the wingmen, you might ask? I don't know. Apparently, more dudes that Tony signed without ever having a plan for them, so he stuck them in a faction where they probably get jobbed out on Dark most of the time. I believe one of the dudes was Peter Avalon. You know, that fuckstick that used to do the librarian gimmick with Leva Bates. Yeah, that guy also still apparently has a job. And it gets even stranger and more completely random, because while they're cutting their promo, out walks Big Cass, or whatever he goes by in Impact now. I guess it's W. Morrissey. I believe the last time we saw him on TV, he did a job to Wardlow in the build-up to the MJF match. So, what, going on 4 months now? So all of a sudden, we're supposed to care when he walks out here and completely destroys all these slapnuts in the ring. Also, Stokely Hathaway can walk down, give him his business card, and then they do a totally staged and campy interview with Tony Schiavone on the ramp, where Stokely grabs Tony by the suit collar, and then they just walk away. And people wonder why I don't give a shit about more than 90% of the garbage they book on this show from week to week. FTR and Wardlow are lucky to ever get more than 5 minutes of screen time from week to week, but by God, we'll give the wingmen, Big Cass, and Stokely Hathaway 5 totally unsubstantiated minutes of screen time for Christ knows what reason. Then Britt Baker and Jamie Hayter wrestle Tony Storm and Hikaru Shida. And I had to fit in a piss break somewhere on this show, so someone was going to have to bite the bullet. And especially after that wingman segment, I kind of needed a palate cleanser anyway. I'm sure it was 4.25 stars on the Dave Meltzer scale. So Well, I believe at this point I skipped through about 2 or 3 pre-tapes that probably would not have been good for my overall health had I actually bore witness to them. One of the pre-tapes saw Kip Sabian with a paper bag over his head, and somehow Pac was involved with this. Don't know, don't really care. And the other involved the House of Drek, which is enough for me to hit the fast forward button. It's a shame the Miraco's caught up in this indie-rific horse dung, because Miro used to be one of my favorite acts on this show in the fall of last year. Now he's doing whatever the hell he's been doing with Malachi and his goons, so kind of over him at this point. So that brought us to, well, I guess you could call it the second half of this whole AEW world title debacle. And I hate to use the term CM Punk and debacle in the same sentence, but after seeing how this panned out, God, I don't even really know how I feel about it, if I'm being honest. Because as far as delivery goes, Punk was great like he always is. Once again, I will adopt from the late great Maxwell Jacob Friedman book when I say CM Punk is among one of the very few guys on this show that always makes me feel anything. From the moment that guy has a microphone in his hand, he always has my undivided attention because he's captivating and he knows how to sell me on his story. So as far as like the delivery and the presentation goes, Punk nailed everything he did here. But then you look at the actual material and what the story was they were trying to get across. And I'm conflicted because I love CM Punk, but I'm also not going to sit here and lie to you by telling you that this was a particularly good payoff or that anything in this segment made a goddamn lick of sense. All right, well, let's just start from the top and talk about some of the early stuff because there was some good here. Basically started with Punk coming out all dejected. Talked about everything from the day he broke his foot on the 1st of June to the day he got surgery to the day he came back and actually issued the challenge to Moxley for their world title match. There was a great moment in here where someone in the front row was heckling him. So Punk, on his feet like the genius he is, while he is talking about the 14 or 15 screws he had placed into his foot to repair the damage, it is more screwing than that fat tub of goo in the front row has ever done in his entire life. And the best part of this whole thing is that he pauses after saying it, and if you look at him, you could tell he actually somewhat felt bad about it. So he just goes, maybe I shouldn't have said that. I thought it was funny. And, well, here's about the point where things kind of went off the rails for me in terms of story logic. Because while Punk is talking about how unsure he is about his future, out comes Ace Steel. Now, you'll recall, this is the guy that came out in the opener and grabbed the open contract that Moxley left in the ring. We were told here, keep that in mind because it's important. We were told, not shown, but told, as if we were all supposed to know offhand, having never been provided any context prior, that Ace Steel was in fact Punk's trainer. And while I at least gave them brownie points for having the guy address that point here so that we at least had some idea, now begs the question, why do I care? Why would I care that CM Punk trained with Ace Steel, a guy we had never seen or heard of up until this very point on the program? I had never heard the name Ace Steel before. I had no idea he was Punk's personal trainer. I had no idea the guy worked for AEW. I had no idea the guy existed until right when it was convenient enough for them to utilize him in a story context. Now, all of a sudden, I'm supposed to care. Now, let's say perhaps if they had shown video packages or pre-tapes of Punk training with the guy months ago or doing sit-downs maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months back where Ace Steel was talking about their history together and how their friendship came about. Okay. There would be context to that, so you're giving me something to work with. But when you throw this shit out there completely at random and out of the blue with no build or prior justification, I'm left wondering, how is this supposed to capture my attention? Now, granted, the guy was very passionate in his delivery, and he managed to get the people fired up here by screaming at Punk and telling him to essentially sign the fucking contract. And the moment Punk's face lit up, you could tell the people got into it. And Punk ends up diving into a fiery babyface promo of his own, which was probably among the better promos I've heard him cut since the stuff he did with MJF back in the spring. He says they've been trying to kill him since day one, and no one succeeded yet, and Moxley isn't going to be the one to do it. He ends up going out into the crowd and firing everyone up with the whole "We Are Chicago" bit. And like I said, his delivery was impeccable, but miraculously, I guess this is supposed to now get me to care about seeing this match again based on what? Punk getting chastised by the gym coach? So just so we're all on the same page here. Their story, their genius, elaborate story that they came up with for this world title match for All Out was to set up CM Punk versus Jon Moxley by beating CM Punk clean in a match with Jon Moxley in 3 minutes. Where in the follow-up to that story was that a week later, CM Punk came down to cut a super somber promo about how his foot is now apparently fine, and now, magically, thanks to a track coach speech from a fat guy we've never seen or heard of before, where he screamed in CM Punk's face and told him to sign the open contract, apparently he is now perfectly healthy to wrestle Moxley at All Out. Again. The same Moxley that I just saw him lose clean to 1 week ago in 3 minutes. Yeah, this is a pretty shitty story. Got to admit, great Punk delivery, and it certainly got over in the building, but as someone watching at home that is trying to make heads or tails out of anything that occurred previously from a story standpoint, I'm not connecting the dots. Maybe it makes sense to the marks, but yeah, I'm not feeling this rematch. Not after what I saw last week. And I'll tell you what I'm also not feeling, Mr. Krabs. This Jungle Boy Christian Cage program. My God, if they botched this thing up all to hell. They did a sit-down with Jim Ross in a dark room where the only thing I wrote down was the following. It was heavily edited, and even with the edited footage of Jungle Boy trying to cut a serious promo, he still sounded faker than a football bat. Speaking of FTR and Wardlow, here's a rare sighting. They actually got to wrestle this week. Good God. Somebody document that moment. It'll probably be another 8 weeks until we see it again. They beat 3 job guys in a relatively short squash. Really nothing to note about it other than I wish we got to see him do shit like this every week on the show. Instead of dishing out screen time to all the undeserving fucks, these guys ought to be working squashes every week. By the way, here's a sad thought. Did anyone else completely forget that Wardlow was the TNT champion? I believe this was the point where Moxley came back out to promise that he was going to drink Punk's blood, cook his liver, and fuck his dead carcass after their match on Sunday. Or something to that effect. Then for our weekly romp and roll trampoline park segment for the week, Well, we actually had two of those on this particular episode, but the first of two, they had a completely random four-way with Dante Martin, Roosh, Ray Phoenix, and Hot Wheel Yuta. There were flips. There were dives. There were twists. There were turns. There were all kinds of lovely and graceful choreographed spots that were all completely forgotten about the moment the match was over. And not a single one of these generic indie clowns are ever going to draw a fucking dime in this business. Those are my thoughts. And I think this was the point in the show where they ran down the All Out card, and I quickly realized by the end, yep, I'm not getting to bed before 3 a.m. By the way, if you haven't noticed, I about completely gave up on the show by this point and was very sporadically taking notes for anything. And with that said, it was now time for the main event. And whereas last week's show pissed me off so bad with that shitty Mox Punk angle, I completely tuned out hour 2. For some reason, I decided to torture myself here and trudge all the way to the finish line. For God knows what reason I want to do that, but, well, I made it thus far. Might as well stick it out to the end. It is Will Ospreay in sidekicks versus the Beta Bucks and Kenny Omega in a compression shirt. And you'll be glad to hear this review won't take that long. From the onset of the opening bell, we had a combination of the following incidents occur in no particular order. Fake forearm elbows from all men, cooperative back and forth chop exchanges, no tags in or out, about 57 corkscrew dives and planches out to the floor, and the referee standing around beating his meat watching it all happen. That all happened before the commercial break. And I didn't even bother to mention the predictable Kenny Omega gesticulations. And when we came back from break, I realized that I had about another 15 minutes of this bullshit to endure. And about midway through this match, after everything I had just mentioned in terms of dives, flips, no-sells, guys hitting every big move in the book and kicking out of everything, they decided to break into a wrestling match with Ospreay's crew working over Kenny Omega's upper body. I know, novel concept. A professional wrestling match broke out during this ballet dance theater. I think my favorite spot of this whole match, there's a complete bullshit deal where one of the Ospreay lackeys had Matt Jackson upside down in a tombstone position, and of course they were trying to steal that dumbass Meltzer driver thing they always do. But of course, they have to get fancy with it. So Ospreay can't just do a double axe off the top rope to spike Matt into the mat. He has to do a shooting star press into the spike pile driver. I just laughed. It's stupid, but I don't know, I guess they needed something for the highlight reel during the replay. And, I mean, what else is there to say about it? They did a million nonsensical things that everyone went ooh and ah for. Most of them probably couldn't recall more than 50% of the actual spots in the match. There was no story here. There was no drama. There was no emotion. It's every paint-by-numbers AEW Chuck E. Cheese fun-for-all segment where the kids are out to play wrestle, and the delinquent, uneducated wrestling fans eat it up like a bowl of soup while the rest of us sit there and either laugh or shake our heads at it. It'll get 5 to 6 stars on the Meltzer scale. People tout about it being the best match of AEW all year, and even though we know it's all hot garbage, it'll still get pumped up that way. I mean, I don't know what else you want me to say about it. I've ranted about how much I hate this ring style for God knows how long now, and while it is mostly tailored for the AEW audience, it's also another one of those subcategory group fan wrestling segments where the people that like this style cheer for it, and the people that hate it will shit on it, and rightfully so. But let's call it as it is. There's nothing all elite or united about this at all. Because I promise you, there are a good handful of boys in the locker room that were either mocking or laughing at these Jayhawks this entire match, if they even decided to watch it, because it's stupid, and we all know it. But like I said before, this works great for me in terms of viewing experience for Dynamite every week, because if this trios tournament is going to be a thing, just let the Beta Bucks and Omega do their thing in the corner room with their playmates, and I don't know, you want to throw guys like Cole and O'Reilly and Fish in there too. It accounts for all the guys I really have no desire to see anymore. So as long as they're involved with this deal and they're not sucking up screen time with the guys I actually do enjoy seeing every week, fine by me. And I talked last week about whether or not I'd even really want to do a preview predictions for this All Out card on Sunday, but the more I look over this thing on the wiki page, I don't even know if I really have the energy. It's not like more than half of these matches were built up on TV anyway. I'm interested to see what they do with the Punk and Moxley match in terms of fallout and whether or not they have MJF make his big return. The match itself I have no vested interest in seeing again, but there are some potential plot fill-ins that they could address. Jericho and Danielson could be a good wrestling match, but the whole Daniel Garcia thing is almost a turnoff for me at this point because I know he's going to get involved and probably drag the whole thing down. Jungle Boy and Christian, they've totally fucked up for me, and now I don't really care. Miro's a lost cause at this point. The six-man with Wardlow and FTR versus Jay Lethal and the Machine Gun should be a good match, but I'm also still wondering why we need to throw Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley in there when there's a million other guys on this roster they ought to be pushing into that spot anyway. Ricky Starks and Powerhouse Hobbs, I completely forgot about that program. Did either of those guys even make a single appearance on this show? If they did, I completely missed it. I mean, I like the idea of the match, just 8 to 12 months from now after you properly establish them as a tag team so that when Hobbs finally does turn on Starks, it'll actually mean something. Instead of just doing it in a completely random TV segment on Dynamite for no reason after Starks just lost the FTW title to Hook. That was dumb. So, yeah, it's kind of my thoughts on this All Out pay-per-view on Sunday. Couple things of intrigue on paper, but I'm not holding out any hope that it'll be a good show, at least per my standards. There'll probably be some good wrestling, but at this point, I'm just kind of hoping they get MJF involved back with things again, because this whole story of him being written off of TV and staying silent for the last few months, it's not working. It was a fine idea in theory, and I even mentioned, if you go back and listen to that promo he did after the Double or Nothing pay-per-view, I said that if they were going to execute a story like this, that MJF needed to be written off of TV for a while. But there's a caveat with that. You also have to book around that by producing a quality television show with MJF absent from the program. And I'm not the only one that's been saying the lack of MJF on the show in the last few months has been a disaster for the show. So they need that guy back in the fold ASAP. If you have Punk win the title back from Moxley and you get MJF in the title hunt, then you got something. But if you keep the belt on Mox and you don't involve MJF in any capacity, well, it just reverts right back to the same old crap. And this show's needed a fresh coat of paint for a long time now. So we are back to normally scheduled programming. And by that, I mean the standard 90-minute studio show. And God, poor Mulkey Brothers, but the burial continues with these two poor juggernauts. If y'all remember from last week's show, there was a midnight squash where they pretty much killed the Mulkeys. And then after the match, one of the brothers tried to shove Corny out on the floor. And that's when Big Bubba Rogers got involved and basically put the guy into a grave. Well, they replayed the whole deal here, up through the spot where Bubba gave the Mulkey brother a second rope splash. Not a good night for the Mulkey brothers last week. And of course, we cut to the interview desk with the usual cast of characters. And David Crockett is still sporting the turtle green blazer. But Corny is all peachy after having watched his boys destroy the two job guys in the opening pre-tape. But out of the gate here, we have a brand new circulating story. A new national heavyweight champion. As Chief Wahoo Mcdaniel defeated Tully Blanchard to become the new champion. And we would be filled in with details on that a little later on. There was also some upcoming information on a new tournament series that Jim Crockett Jr. would be discussing, to which Tony then proceeded to turn things over to David Crockett for comment. And David had nothing to say. He stood there stammering for a moment, and then I wrote, "Thank God Jim Cornette there to think on his feet and save the day. What would we do without him?" And here's their ad lib that they came up with on the spot, because David Crockett totally blanked out on what he wanted to say earlier. Corny goes, "David Crockett, is that your real head or did your neck throw up? You look horrible today." And David, completely unable to restrain himself from laughter, totally gives up, turns to the camera, and goes, "I like him." And the best part of this whole thing, you got David laughing, you got Tony laughing, you got Corny cracking a smile, and meanwhile, there's Big Bubba standing in the background, totally stone-faced. It was impossible, man. Cornette could not get this guy to break kayfabe no matter how hard he tried. Bubba Rogers, dude. That guy was the man. So we cut to the ring for our first match. It's Dick Murdock versus Mike Rose. Mike Rose, who I almost mistook as Pat Rose, who was also a job guy that worked in the Mid-South territory in the mid-'80s. Some more great commentary from Cornette here, as he's spending the first few minutes making fun of Dick Murdock, basically cracking every redneck joke in the book. And while Murdock has the guy in an armbar, he goes, "Corny, you can take his place and get in here." The studio crowd all popped. Corny also breaking the fourth wall in this match by noting that Mike Rose has no idea what he's doing in this match, especially going up against a guy like Dick Murdock. I mainly interpreted that as him just saying Mike Rose has no idea what he's doing, period. Because let's be honest, most of these job guys had no earthly clue what they were doing. Anyway, Murdock won with an incredibly botched brainbuster that looked so horrendous, they didn't even bother showing a replay. All I could note is that if Mike Rose ever walked again after that, he was incredibly lucky. Then we had a Wahoo Mcdaniel promo. Basically talked about how he won the national heavyweight title in LA. Said he promised he was going to win a belt by the end of '86. I don't recall that promo, but I'll take his word for it. And basically promised to be a fighting champion. And as he's wrapping up his promo, Jim Crockett Jr. came in to make his big announcement for the tournament. And of course, as soon as Tony mentioned it at the beginning of the show, I remembered exactly what the tournament was. But Crockett talked about how the NWA used to have national tag team champions, but when Ole Anderson got taken out earlier in the year, the belts were held up, and well, he never outright said this, but they essentially fizzled the belts out with no explanation. They just totally disappeared. But now they're going to be hosting a tournament to crown a new set of tag team champions. In addition to their world tag team champions, they were now going to be hosting a tournament to crown the first ever NWA United States tag team champions. They said more details would be filled with that later on. Next up, we had the Kansas Jayhawks versus Randy Barber and Alan Martin. A match that was made purely great by listening to David Crockett talk over Cornette the entire match. Those two. The chemistry was unreal. There is a point in this match where Randy Barber had completely forgotten how to take a simple back body drop, and Bobby Jaggers barely got him over. And of course, Cornette immediately gave him shit for it by calling out the job guy, and I think he called him Tubby. Also enjoyed Cornette making fun of Dirty Dutch Mantel for needing to revert to using foreign objects to win. Saying, I hate people that use foreign objects to cheat in wrestling. And David Crockett just goes, you ever look in the mirror? Anyway, the match was okay. Went about 5 minutes longer than necessary. And the Jayhawks won with a double team move. And they immediately cut to the interview booth with Corny. And this is some great stuff here. You basically have Cornette cowering behind Bubba the whole time while Jaggers and Dirty Dutch are cutting promos on the Midnight Express, talking about how if they're such a great team, how come they lost the world tag belts? And the whole thing basically ends with Dutch saying that he's glad Crockett Promotions is hosting a U.S. tag title tournament so him and Jaggers can finally get their hands on some gold. And no joke, in the middle of his promo, Corny just cuts him off and goes, all right, we're through. Get out of here. Shut up. Have I ever noted how great Cornette was back in the day? I don't know if I ever mentioned that or not. After break, we had Dick Murdock out for a promo. I had thought he was coming out to read the obituary for that Mike Rose guy that he just killed 2 segments ago. No, instead he was there to talk about the great talent in the NWA, up to and including Ric Flair. And he basically cut almost the exact same promo he did last week, where he talked about how Flair can sport all the fancy clothes in the world. He can hook up with the girls and ride in private jets and live the luxury lifestyle, but it doesn't make him the man. And basically says when they get in the ring for their match, Murdock is going to give him the fight of his life. Then Wahoo Mcdaniel wrestled Tony Zane, or as David Crockett continues to refer to him after all these months, Mcdaniels. Still fucking his name up. How long has it been now? They wrestled for several excruciatingly boring minutes, and Wahoo won with a tomahawk chop. Oh, and Tony Zane also appeared to have several more welts and bruises on his body since the last time we saw him. Seriously, did that guy get ribbed in the locker room or something? I feel like the constant body bruises weren't just from him wrestling. Anyhow, then we cut to the ring booth with Corny and the rest of the Midnights. And by the rest of the Midnights, I mean Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey. All 2 of them. And of course, last week's big story development was the Baby Doll heel turn where she joined back up with the Horsemen. So now, because Cornette is a heel, now he is starting to have second thoughts on his original opinions of Baby Doll. Perhaps she's not that bad after all. She has seen the light. He said that he recently got the chance to talk to her after Baby Doll had met up with Cornette's mother, and after encouraging him to go over and have a conversation with her, Cornette realized that Baby Doll actually has talent. There is even the slightest chance that, brace yourselves, maybe someday, Cornette and Baby Doll could become friends. Oh, the irony. Anyway, well, that obviously never materialized on TV because of what ended up happening with Baby Doll not too long from now, but Corny turned things over to talking about the Bubba Dusty program. Essentially said Bubba was going to leave Dusty in a ditch after he's through with him. And then he said his boys were screwed out of the world tag belts and basically said they were going to win them back. I got distracted here, though, because while Corny is cutting this promo, I'm watching Bobby Eaton, who I don't really know what he was doing here. Okay, first he whispered something to Bubba, and then he muttered something to Condrey that we couldn't quite pick up on the mic. I don't know if I was looking more into this than I should have, but I can only guess that one of two things were happening here. Either Bobby Eaton was planning something devious, or he really had to take a waz and was trying to speed things along in this promo so he could run to the back and drain the cow. That was my conclusion. So then we cut back to the ring for Sam Houston versus Jack Weathers. Jack Weathers sporting a poor man's Jerry Lawler singlet. They wrestled for a few minutes, and Houston won with the running bulldog, which David Crockett marked out for, as only David knew how to do. I did note, too, Cornette being a very effective heel commentator here by being sure to put over how great of an athlete Sam Houston is and how much he has improved in the ring in his short tenure in the business, but still making sure to refer to him as a goof at various points in the match. Great heel move. Speaking of great heels, how about Buddy Landel and superstar Bill Dundee? Yeah, no secret here, but those guys are pretty damn great. At Dundee basically talking about how they came into the NWA for suitable competition, so he throws out Dickie Murdock as someone to go up against Landel. He also threw some jabs at guys like Dusty and Magnum and the Rock and Roll Express, essentially just digging himself a shallow grave here by calling out the entire babyface locker room, as if none of these men were ever going to answer their challenge at any point. And then Landel got on the stick and immediately began taking shots at Ric Flair. Said that Space Mountain is officially closed, and if the girls ever catch Flair riding down the freeway in his custom Mercedes, they may as well turn that back around and head in the other direction. And this is great too, because while Buddy is cutting this promo on the girls in the studio, they put the camera on one single female in the crowd who I can only best describe as looking utterly bored. And then Buddy kind of reiterated Dundee's talking point about how they want real competition and they want some gold around their waist. Then the Rock and Roll Express beat Phil Brown and Lee Peak with a double drop kick. Only thing I noted about this segment was David Crockett continuing to be a thorn in Corny's side here by mocking the fact that the Rock and Roll Express are now the new tag team champions and not the Midnight Express. Fungus on a shower curtain. I think that was Cornette's line to describe the Midnight Rock and Roll program. I got to start using that one. Then we had the Blonde Bomber and the Blonde Bombshell out for a promo, a.k.a. Ric Flair and Baby Doll. And this promo began with a plug. And I have no earthly clue what the hell this was, but Flair wanted everyone to know that the Horsemen would be attending, and I wrote this down verbatim, the Mickey Spillane Celebrity Fishing Tournament. The fuck? Anyway, he very quickly turned things over to every paint-by-numbers Slick Rick promo you've ever heard. Literally, it is a carbon copy of every promo you've ever heard Flair do. Girls, cars, luxury lifestyle, hotel fucking, and Space Mountain. It was all there. However, he did address something very specific. He name-dropped Buddy Landel, who, as we know, had been taking shots at Flair on television for weeks now. And here's his comeback line to Buddy after several weeks of underhanded pot shots. He says that a little girl came up to Flair in the last several days and said getting laid by Buddy was like riding the wild mouse. Great comment. And he basically capped everything off with a Bray Wyatt promo by saying he's got the whole world in his hands. You know, minus the cult thing and the weird cryptic dialogue and God, whatever other strange shit they used to book with Bray Wyatt over the years. God, remember the fucking crickets and the worm graphics that one year at WrestleMania? Ah, poor Bray. They butchered that guy's push. Then we cut to the ring for a Buddy, Landel, Bill Dundee versus Rocky King, Vernon Deaton match. And God, man, going back and watching this again, it makes you really think what a missed opportunity Rocky King was. Seriously, that guy was extremely underutilized. You go back and watch him in the first few minutes of this match where he's just getting the shine on Buddy and Dundee. That guy was a great house of fire. I love the spot where he flipped Dundee overhead with a backdrop while he had Buddy in a standing headlock. And that dude was a great athlete. And of course, as soon as Vernon Deaton got in there, the match totally died. As did the crowd. Finish saw Landel hit Deaton with an elbow drop, and then he tagged in Dundee so he could do his bombs away drop off the top rope. First couple of minutes were really good with Rocky King, but Vernon Deaton kind of screwed it all up. And then we cut to the booth for Craig Sager and Warren Spahn. And you're probably asking yourself right about now, who in the fuck are Craig Sager and Warren Spahn? Well, here's what I was able to gather based on what I saw here. I learned that Craig Sager was a sports analyst for CNN, and Warren Spahn was a Hall of Famer. A Hall of Famer in what field? Well, he kept mentioning something about baseball here, so I assume baseball. And I have absolutely no idea what the point of this was, other than Spahn providing his rationale for getting into baseball instead of professional wrestling. He said something about a previous first baseman getting into the wrestling business, and I guess Spahn also worked with him on a team at one point or another, and he didn't want to work with him in baseball, therefore he wouldn't have wanted to work with him in wrestling. I have no fucking clue what was going on here. Maybe someone can refresh my memory. Was there a former 1970s or 1980s pro wrestler that was also a first baseman for a major league baseball team? I mean, I'm not denying there wasn't. There probably was, but it would have been good to maybe get some insight on who that name was. Complete waste of 2 minutes of airtime. Coming back from the break, we had the Russians out for a promo, and even with the broken English, I could still at least make some general sense out of what these guys were talking about over the geeks in the previous segment. But Ivan talked about the U.S. Tag Title Tournament and how great it would be if the Russians not only had possession of the U.S. Heavyweight Singles title, but if they also had possession of the U.S. Tag titles. Boy, wouldn't that just rub it in the face of all those no-good Americans. Then he got into a tangent about how Magnum had tricked the Russians by getting the promoters to sign off on a U.S. title match between Nikita and Ronnie Garvin, only for the Russians to realize several days out from the show that Magnum tricked the Russians, and it was actually Magnum TA who was scheduled to wrestle Nikita for the belt. And of course, this grave miscarriage of justice, because we all know the importance of a wrestler knowing his opponent well in advance so they can properly prepare for that individual. So while Ivan's doing his spiel, Tony Schiavone butts in and says that they have footage of a recent show with a Nikita Garvin face-off. And of course, Ivan's sitting there going, no, we don't need to see this footage. So as we cut to the closing moments of a Nikita Koloff-Sam Houston match, the Afterbirth sees Nikita try to get in some more heat on Houston, but as Ronnie runs in for the save, Nikita tries to cheap shot him by wrapping the chain around his fist, but Ronnie beats him to the punch, ironically enough, and he lays out Nikita with a hard fist. And of course, Nikita has a rebuttal for this no-good Ronnie Garvin fella, this sucker punch he gave to nephew Nikita. So Nikita tells him that he's got good shot, and he knocked Nikita down, but he no keep Nikita down for good. He no knock Nikita out. And he tells Ronnie that he's good competition, but he's not good enough to be U.S. heavyweight champion. And now the challenge is initiated. God, Nikita was so great. Ivan was phenomenal too, but Nikita, man. That guy was a presence. A true once-in-a-lifetime kind of character. Speaking of Garvin, we had the other Garvin out for a match with Rocky Kernodle. Still haven't acknowledged on TV yet that Ronnie and Jimmy Garvin are actually related, but no, well, don't worry, we're closing in on the fireball angle in due time. Of course, the first thing of note for every horny male in the room that was watching this at the time, that Precious attire. And I believe Corny referred to her as looking healthy, to which David immediately responded by saying, bodacious. Yeah, she was certainly expressing herself in that exposed top. David was watering at the mouth. The match was not as impressive as Precious standing there looking amazing. This did go through a commercial break for whatever reason, wherein during that time, Cornette informed us that the fans were denigrating poor Precious with horrible comments. Interesting how those comments ceased to exist when they came back from the break. Nice try, Corny. I see what you were trying to do there. They surprisingly let Kernodle get in a good amount of offense on Garvin here, which was strange. Of all job guys, they did some amateur wrestling, a lot of head scissor holds with Garvin. He was also fixing his hair in the process, which was fantastic. And the finish saw Garvin fire back on Kernodle with a series of several moves until finally putting him away with the Brain Buster. There was also another studio chant going on here that I couldn't quite pick up on, but it had something to do with Precious's clothing. Presumably they were calling her a slut. And that was followed with Garvin and Precious at the booth for, I think he referred to it as a gorgeous Jimmy update. And while he still got his main squeeze in the business, he also has his sights set on Magnum TA. He made fun of Magnum for being a former male stripper. He said anyone with the name Magnum TA has a inferiority complex. And he basically says that he doesn't need fancy suits, belts, or nice things to show why he's the best. As long as he's standing here waiting for someone to put him in his place, he will continue to be the best. And it's not his fault. Can't argue with that logic. And speaking of the devil, we had Dusty and Magnum's scarred forehead out for a retort promo. And, well, first Magnum kind of patched up the remaining story deal with him and Nikita. Basically told him to keep that U.S. heavyweight belt nice and warm for him until he comes back to reclaim it. But onto the subject of Gorgeous Jimmy, he says that Jimmy's got him all wrong. What Magnum is in the NWA to do is to fight. And if Jimmy doesn't watch his mouth, he's going to find himself getting put down when Magnum gets his hands on him. tells him to get in the ring and show him how tough he really is. And then Dusty chimed in by talking about all the girls running around with the boys right now, including Skimpy Loose Precious. Says that they got back from their Las Vegas tour recently, where Magnum TA was hanging around all the lovely ladies. And I'm not making this up when I say this, but Dusty pretty much inferred here that he was there to pick up the scraps. So in other words, Magnum was fucking a whole bunch of women, and Dusty was hanging around to finish the job. Kinky. And while he's running down the Horsemen and their storied history, he says that him and Magnum are here to talk about wrestling, and not Ric Flair's chubby girlfriend in the front row. Polarizing bombshells from the American Dream at the studio. I am starting to figure out now why the split chants were a thing around this point. In his closing lines, I'm not making this up, he simply goes, "Baby doll," and then he claps 3 times, and he walks off with Magnum. And Tony, unsure of what to make of this whole thing, just goes, "All right then, let's go to the ring." And we went to the ring for something truly unique. Jimmy Valiant is back, and he's here to put the boost to some job guys. And who better to go in there and beat up than Art Pritz, my favorite job guy to see get beat up on the TBS Superstation, alongside Tony Zane, of course. And this is so fucking great because for the entirety of the segment, David Crockett is totally mute, not making a single comment on anything that is going on. Meanwhile, you got Cornette running down Valiant and talking about how the Paul Jones army is going to send Valiant packing by the end of 86 because, as we learned from last week, or several weeks ago, if Jimmy Valiant doesn't shave Paul Jones bald, he will leave the NWA at the end of the year. And finally, at the most random point in this match, after having not said anything for several minutes, David Crockett casually interjects by snidely going, "Jimmy Valiant is going to shave Paul Jones bald." And he said this with such confidence and such self-assurity, I popped. Of course, Corny also drawing attention to Valiant's scientific skill of cheating and using every heel tactic in the book to win. Valiant won with the elbow drop. Cutting to the booth, we had JJ and Tully Blanchard out for a promo. Y'all wonder why I talk about how great of a promo JJ was in 1986. This is just fucking amazing. He says a lot of people were insinuating that Tully was going to show up at the studio today with his head down because he lost the national heavyweight title. But the fact is, he'll be champion again. The real discussion is around the fact that when Tully showed up at the airport in Atlanta earlier in the day, nobody was commenting on the fact that Tully was no longer the national champion. People were gathering around saying, that's the man that hurt Dusty Rhodes and cost him the world heavyweight title. And you got Tully chiming in saying, yeah, not being the national champion, sure. I'll take a little bit of a pay cut in the short term. And yeah, Wahoo proved he was the better man on one occasion. But at the end of the day, when Dusty walks around talking about big bucks, the big bucks are determined by who gets in the ring and gets the biggest impact. And when Tully beat Dusty half to death with a chair, that's big bucks. He tells Dusty to never forget that it was Tully that beat him for the national title on television and almost put him out of commission for good by breaking his leg with a chair. And not only was this the best goddamn thing on the entire show, but I was not the only one thinking this apparently. As Tully Blanchard is cutting this scathing heel promo on Dusty and all of the locker room baby faces, and you got the studio audience sitting there cheering him on, validating every word he says. No shame. mean, hey, I am not going to deny Tully's delivery. Heel or not, it was fan-fucking-tabulous. I made that term up on the spot, and I stand by it. And the greatness rolled along here with Ole and Arn out for a promo. Ole talking about how everyone's been dropping the term belts in their promos throughout the show, but Ole and Arn have their sights set on the Rock and Roll Express and the World Tag titles. He also mentioned something here about Tulsa Tubby, which, got to admit, I didn't pick up on that. Although this was the second time on the show where I heard the word Tubby used. And then Arn talked about being a dominant television champion by defending against all comers in the company. Said wrestling is determined by one thing, human error. And the fact that the Horsemen have been virtually unstoppable, it's made Arn realize that he needs to constantly be on his toes because he knows all the top guys are gunning for him. Says that anyone in the back that wants to give him a go can, but no one can beat him for the TV title in 20 minutes or less. And as they go to the ring, Arn tells Ole, let's go make an example out of these two punks. And boy, they made an example all right. They wrestled the team of the Italian Stallion, and I am not making this name up, Henry Rutley. And of course, Courtney immediately buried the guy 10 feet under by saying Rutley should have had his body sued for non-support. I mean, his physique wasn't that bad. He was certainly in better shape than, say, Tony Zane, for example. Anyway, here's pretty much what I wrote down. I wrote, Henry Rutley, in all caps. Stallion got a brief flurry of offense early on, and then the Andersons killed Rutley and ended up getting him to submit with an arm wrench. And then coming back from break, we had Hawk and Animal out at the booth in street clothes. And when I say street clothes, I meant Hawk was wearing his usual spiked shoulder padding. He was wearing face paint, no shirt, and from the waist down, he was wearing light wash denim jeans. And Animal was wearing basically the same thing, except I think his pants were cargos. I laughed at this attire. So Hawk began by calling out Jim the Flyride Cornette and Big Blubba for cowering Offset as soon as the Legion of Doom came out. And this was vintage Hawk on the mic. He says that him and Animal were hanging out in Chicago the last few days, not fighting, which was out of the ordinary for them. And while they were walking around, the people kept asking when they were going to get back in the ring to beat people up. The problem, however, is that not a lot of guys want to fight Hawk and Animal because they know they'll get their skulls caved in. And then Animal got on a stick and, well, he essentially vowed body dismemberment on all members of the Four Horsemen. It's really no other way to describe it. And then he talked about all the towns they would be visiting in the next few days so they could beat dudes up. And the studio crowd all went, yeah. Then we cut to the ring for a rare sighting. I think they billed this the match of the week. All right, then. I mean, maybe for the time it was. It was a Ric Flair match, and he was wrestling good old Mike Jackson. And what a great match this was. This was every by-the-book Ric Flair match. Telling you, dude, it never mattered if he was going in there to wrestle Sting, Luger, Hogan, or the regular cast of TBS studio job guys. Flair was going to go in there, he was going to work his ass off, and he was going to make sure everyone he worked with looked good in result. He had Jackson running wild early on, hitting Flair with a great series of offense. Of course, Flair's going in there and bumping and selling like a madman. They built to a great heat sequence where Flair dumped Randy Jackson. not Randy Jackson, Jesus Christ, Mike Jackson out to the floor. And of course, Mike gets back in the ring, starts milking a comeback on Flair. Takes a good bump out to the floor at one point. Eventually, Flair fought back so that Baby Doll could run some interference while Flair distracted Pee Wee. And finally, both guys end up exchanging some blows back and forth. Jackson ends up hanging himself in the ropes for a crossbody attempt. Then Flair takes advantage, gets Jackson to submit with the figure four. And to put things to a great closure here, Baby Doll comes in, tries to get in a few more cheap shots on Jackson while Cornette comments the following. You know, that Baby Doll might be fun after all. Maybe I shouldn't comment on that one. But I will comment on how awesome Ric Flair was. Seriously, man, that guy was the epitome of the phrase, he could have a good match with a broomstick. Any day of the week. You know, and obviously Mike Jackson was a very good worker in his day, so it's probably why the match went so well, but fun TV segment. Then we came back from break where Nikita Koloff killed some guy named Dave Spencer in about a minute. I wrote literally nothing down about it. And that was followed with all members of the Paul Jones Army out for a promo segment, including Shaska Watley's wacky attire, which appears to get wackier and wackier with each passing show. And I'll be honest, a lot of this promo was hard to decipher because Paul Jones was getting drowned out by the fans. Obviously, he is covering the story of them promising to rid Jimmy Valiant from the NWA by the end of the calendar year. But he said something about their preparation to get the job done. He said, they are going to tour around the mid-central states and essentially shave everyone's head that they come across. To which I wrote down, I would have loved to have seen pre-tapes of the Paul Jones Army attacking random people in the streets and shaving their heads. That would have been high comedy. I also wrote this down. Tijo Khan. The best. He was the absolute best. A totally useless character, but that guy's facials are enough to make him worth the investment. My God, what a way to go down in this week's episode. As God is my witness, this was their main event. I'm not making this up. A 6-man tag. It is Shaska Watley, Baron Von Raschke, and Tijo Khan versus Johnny Cook, Charles Freeman, and Mark Cooper. Now, I want to hold up for a minute. I want you to do an experiment for me. I want you to picture in your mind the visual of what this may look like. The names I just mentioned. Put that all in a bubble. Picture in your head how you think this match went down. Okay, now that you have that visual in your head, I can confirm that yes, it was that fucking bad. Johnny Cook, I swear to God, every time I saw him on camera, I just started laughing. He had yellow tights, bleached yellow hair, not even blonde hair. It was literally yellow, the color of urine. He was scrawny as all get out, paler than a fucking ghost. He was the total embodiment of a 1980s job guy on studio wrestling. Just geek. When you look up the word geek in the dictionary, Johnny Cook is the definition. 3 totally useless job guys wrestling 3 cartoon goofballs with 2 left feet. Glorious train wreck television this was. And of course, the best part is that when the Johnny Cook guy actually tagged in at the very end, Jim Cornette, who had spent the entire match giving him shit by referring to him as a tooth fairy and Santa's little helper, When the guy tagged in, Corny just totally went into business for himself and started burying the guy at every turn. And of course, in addition to Cook physically looking like garbage, he had one spot to pull off in this match. One move. And he fucked it up. As Tijo goes to whip him off the ropes to catch him in a power slam position, as Cook runs off the ropes, and he stops before Tijo can grab a hold of him. So, in order to execute this finish, because, yes, this was the finishing sequence, Tijo pretty much had to deadlift this guy into a power slam position as a shoot, turn him over, because the job guy was apparently too retarded to do one basic move. This was a 5-star epic failure in every way. I have to know, how much did these guys get paid? The studio job guys in particular, I'm wondering. Like, I don't know. The more I think about it, I don't have the best body in the world. I'm not what you would say a genetic jackhammer in any way, but, I mean, come on. I could at least pull off one basic move. Good Lord. Yeah, these studio guys, they, with very few exceptions, these guys sucked. Pretty bad. And with about 2 minutes left of airtime, they very quickly shoehorned a Dick Murdock promo in here as he's calling out Baby Doll and Ric Flair. He essentially got in some lines about Baby Doll being a fat cow before Flair and the rest of the Horsemen came out to confront him. And this was so great because Flair and the Horsemen are standing at the desk with their backs turned to the ring. And, you know, Flair's doing his usual cocky heel promo, saying anyone that disrespects the Horsemen are going to get a receipt. And it all leads to a great show-closing brawl where Dick Murdock challenges one of the Horsemen to get in the ring and fight him. And meanwhile, the Horsemen have their backs turned to the ring, so they do not see that Dusty, Magnum, and Ronnie Garvin are all standing in the ring ready to cut them off at the pass. So, like idiots, the Horsemen back into the ring, and then when they turn around, the babyfaces, they're there to immediately put the boots to them. And there's all this chaos ensuing. The people are going nuts. And with the patented Tony Schiavone line to close things out, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. We got to go. And David Crockett, the biggest mark in the world, responds by going, "No, we can't be." That guy always knew how to bring a smile to my face. As a show, it's kind of hit and miss at various points. But, as always, it is exciting and very newsworthy. Cornette in particular, he always adds an extra boost of life to the show when he's out there with Crockett and Schiavone. You know, between the good promo material, that Ric Flair match at the end, the complete mess of a 6-man with the Paul Jones army, I had fun. Like I said, you know, these shows aren't boring. And, you know, even going back with the 90-minute format, they never feel like they drag. There's always something to talk about with these shows, new things circulating and brewing every week, and I'm always excited to see what happens next. It's the kind of wrestling product you want, where you just want to tune in to see what happens next. Anyhow, normally, this would be the point where we transition to world-class wrestling. And this would also be the point where I would highly benefit to do a little bit of research before we dive into the retro review so that I can at least make sure that there isn't an episode missing from the archives. Yeah, World Class didn't actually air this week in 1983. And the reason for that, Labor Day. I always forget back in the day when wrestling used to actually treat holidays like actual holidays. Now, they did end up taping for their 1983 Labor Day Star Wars, which took place in Fort Worth, Texas, as I found out after doing some brief research. That aired on September 5th at the Convention Center in Fort Worth. And as we remember from the June Star Wars event, what they did is that they taped those shows and then they aired them over the next few weeks on World Class TV. So we will be picking up with World Class over the next few weeks. I believe the next date would be September 10th, 1983, where they start airing the matches that they taped for the September 5th show. As always, I don't want to get too ahead of myself in the retro archives, because if I end up skipping all the way to the 10th of September, I'll end up being a week ahead of schedule, and we won't be staying consistent with the retro reviews. So it is an off week in the review series, but holidays, what can you do? Anyway, as we wrap up things for today, make sure to subscribe, comment, like the show. Come back to check everything out on YouTube and Rumble every week. The support is greatly appreciated from new and returning viewers. And again, whether you're watching this on YouTube or Rumble, wherever your viewing pleasure comes from, I really do appreciate it. Thank you for sticking around. And because I did not get to the Monday podcast in time this week, I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there real quick. Ideally, I would like to get the Monday show uploaded on time, but this upcoming weekend is also another packed show with the WWE Clash at the Castle and the AEW All Out pay-per-view. The AEW show does not air until Sunday night, so I can't make any promises I'll be able to record and upload on the same day. You know, Mondays are already kind of hectic for me as it is, so it all depends on how long it takes for me to record that show, period. I don't expect it'll hit the 2-hour mark like this past week did, because it'll still be lengthy. We're talking about a couple pay-per-view events. There's just a lot of material to cover. So I wanted to throw that in the air, and maybe up on Monday, more than likely Tuesday. After that, though, it'll probably be back to the normal Monday format once we get everything recorded, edited, and uploaded in time. The Friday shows will remain intact, but whereas normally I usually like to have the podcast up late morning, early afternoon, I have some upcoming schedule adjustments I need to make. So uploads for future Friday podcasts may come sometime in the evening. Normally I don't get the chance to watch the Dynamite shows until Thursday on delay, and I have some other Friday morning commitments for the time being that'll interfere with my usual recording time. So the Friday shows will still be uploaded on Friday. It just might take an extra few hours to get them edited and uploaded. Anyway, thank you for watching. I know my AEW review will rub a lot of people the wrong way, but you know what? Good. I make no apologies, because the people need to hear the harsh realities. If you want that company to succeed, have higher standards. Demand better. And after the whole CM Punk debacle a week ago, I stand by everything I said in last week's Dynamite review. And if you don't like it, TS. But for those of you that did take the time to listen and you found value in what I said, thank you. We will see what they have to offer on Sunday night. My hopes are not high. Take care, all. Peace.